Upper Echelon is brought to you by Deloitte for innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning turned to Deloitte. Well, in our Upper Echelon this week, Tom Boardman, a non-executive director of Nedbank, former chief executive of that group and board of executives, and his own company, and 62 now, though, in December coming up. And Tom, how have you been spending the last couple of years in blissful retirement?
Well, Alec, you know, one of the things that I really have come to understand is that life is actually one long learning journey and you never stop learning. And the last 18 months, I must tell you, I've continued going on a steep learning curve. So it's been a very busy time. I think kind of out of concern after nearly 40 years of working flat out in business full time, one kind of another, to go from 100 to 0 on retirement didn't appeal to me. So I asked a lot of people whose opinions I respect what advice they would give me on retiring. And the most consistent theme was don't take on too much too soon. So I've learned another lesson. You shouldn't ask smart people for advice and then ignore it because I took on too much too soon.
Well, we see you stepped off the Vodacom board, which has only been on there for about a year or so.
No, it's two and a half years. I actually went on to that one before I stood down as chief executive. The board at Nedbank said I could go on to one listed company board before retirement to sort of start preparing the way. And it's been a very interesting time because I was there as independent director and also chairman of the audit committee for the listing. And you may recall there was some fun around the time of the listing with injunctions to try and stop the listing. What has happened with Vodacom is that I've actually joined the board of a Swedish company, investment company, which is a very interesting company, a global, operates in 32 countries. And we've started finding a conflict of interest between some of their mobile telephony businesses and Vodafone and Vodacom as Vodacom moves into the rest of Africa. And I thought it was probably better before the conflicts got out of hand to make a call. And I made the call to stand down from Vodacom. But it was a very interesting experience, and it's a very fine company doing very well.
And it's interesting to see it coincided with one of your proteges, I suppose you could call him, Rob Shooter, moving off now to the Netherlands to go and run a bigger part of the business in the Vodafone empire.
Yeah, and that's just one of those things that is absolutely pure coincidence. I made my call about 4 months ago. And that was before the Netherlands job had come on the rise. And Rob had always said when he took the CFO job at Vodacom that he wanted to move back into line management. And he's now been offered a big CEO position in the Netherlands. So good luck to Rob, but it is pure coincidence that we're going at the same time.
I know you've been keeping busy with giving back. And we discussed this in quite a lot of detail at the time that you were still in the CEO's role. And you said, give me a bit of time to settle in. And I'd like to talk to you about it. And here's an opportunity. What have you been occupying yourself with?
So setting the business part aside, because, Nedbank asked me to stay on the Nedbank board, and then Woolworths asked me to go on to the Woolworths board. And I'm now, with Simon Sisman coming in as chairman this month, I'm now going to be taking on the role of lead independent at Woolworths. And I'm also on the board of African Rainbow Minerals and Royal Bafokeng Holdings. So the company boards that I'm on have kept me more than busy, and I must say the responsibilities of directors get more and more onerous, and the amount of time you've got to spend on companies, I think, grows. But the parts that I must say I really enjoyed the most have been getting involved on the NGO side. So I've been on the WWF, the World Wildlife Fund board, for the last 2 and a bit years, and on the Peace Parks Foundation, which is doing some amazing work in extending the territory and land available for wildlife preservation across boundaries. It's a very exciting business doing some extraordinary things, or NGO. And then I've been chairing a small foundation, the David Rattray Foundation in KwaZulu-Natal, where we look after 16 schools, over 5,000 children in the schools. And that's a much more hands-on operation than the other 2 bigger NGOs. And I must say I found that particularly enjoyable and particularly rewarding, because I think the way the foundation is going about its work there is exemplary.
Who's helping fund that, Tom? Because Dave Rattray was obviously from my area of the world was a icon here, and his passing was much mourned, not only by people in KwaZulu-Natal, but I guess from some leading lights elsewhere.
Yeah, so David's death was a great tragedy for all of us, and for the country. And I think that what his wife Nikki, when people from all over the world who knew David and who'd listened to him or had visited Fugitives Drift and sat at his feet at Isandlwana, said, we'd like to do something. Nikki said, well, she and David had started looking after the two little schools, one at Rorke's Drift, one at Isandlwana, and they'd like to continue the work. And so people started making contributions to the David Rattray Foundation. It grew and grew, and then the schools around the immediate area started seeing the work that was being done there and asked if they could also become beneficiaries of the Rattray Foundation, and so the twos moved to 16, and as I said, over 5,000 learners. So it's not a huge foundation. We're spending probably 3 to 4 million a year. And I think, again, one of the innovative things that the foundation does is that we actually coordinate a number of other NGOs and their work in the area with our work and with the KZN Education Department.
That's a serious amount of money from a standing start, 3 to 4 million, and needs funding. Does it come from companies or individuals?
It's largely from individuals. We've had some company sponsorship, but largely from individuals and from family trusts. We have done some fundraising in the UK. I mean, David was a huge figure in the United Kingdom, particularly anyone who's been in the military at any time, who'd listened to David, been associated with the Welsh Regiment. So a lot of the great and good from, the Prince of Wales, who we've had the privilege of just having in South Africa, from Prince of Wales through to, I think, 12 or 13 generals of the British Army have all been to Isandlwana and have made contributions.
Tom, it's extraordinary, though. He is a friend, or was a friend of yours when he was alive, but he had many other friends. Not every one of them stood up and continued his good work. What made you?
Well, when I first listened to David, which was back in 1990, my first trip to Isandlwana, I was deeply moved by his view of that part of our history, and particularly the way he looked at it from a point of view of reconciliation in our country. And I think, given where South Africa, sort of headed into, and the reconciliation and reconstruction that the country needs, I think he made a profound contribution to it. So with David dying, I kind of thought it would be very sad if his work just got lost. I didn't take on the chairmanship of the foundation ab initio when it was started. A chap called Rob Taylor did an outstanding job for the first couple of years and then handed over to me. But we're now building, one of the fascinating things we're doing, Alec, is we work on a sort of 5-point program. Number one is community involvement. And we actually use another NGO who are specialists in getting communities involved to do that piece of work for us. So we work with communities for 6 months before we go in, and we get the communities to understand they own the school, it's their children, and that the people, the teachers must do what they need to do. And they must be held accountable by the parents. And that's not an easy thing to land, because very often the local people are intimidated by the teachers. One of the most exciting things of our 5-point plan is when it comes to infrastructure is we are now building schools, and we're building them using a very innovative but very ancient building methodology called rammed earth, which we are now building schools at roughly half the cost of a normal public works department school, half the environmental footprint, because the rammed earth is done using sand on site with a minimal amount of cement added, and it's done using local labor. The schools are aesthetically more beautiful than the old traditional painted brick buildings. The community build them and get a sense of ownership. They have better heat retention and in the winter, and they're cooler in the summer. And we're now building school number 6, so making some very good progress there.
On a personal side, I do recall that you said one of the first things you would do when you left was go and have a look at the Roman ruins in Libya. Did you manage to get up there before the Gaddafi thing hit?
Well, I must tell you, I did the very first week of my retirement. I had to go and do some work for Nedbank in my first week of retirement with the World Bank in Tunis. And so I, after my meetings in Tunis, plugged on 10 days and did the Roman ruins in Tunisia. And they are quite remarkable. Obviously there's Carthage, which is now really a suburb of Tunis. And then down to some of the most exceptional ruins I've seen anywhere in the world, Roman ruins, places like Duga and Sufetela. And we were going to try and get across to Libya, but didn't fit into that trip. And I guess I'm going to have to wait a little bit now before I go.
Tom, why is history important?
Well, I think history is a bit like life. You know, we never stop learning in life, as I said earlier. And I think history, apart from telling us where we came from, maybe by understanding history and how we got here, we can avoid some of the mistakes that we might otherwise make. We should always look to the future, but I think we need to learn from the past.
Is it more a fascination for you with and you are a buff on Roman history and on South African history, or is it something that you feel we need to know?
Well, I think we need to know it. So, you know, maybe Roman history we don't need to know as much. My interest in Roman history came from reading law, because I had to do Latin at school and university, and when you did the Latin part, you did Roman history. And that left me with an abiding interest in the Romans. They were extraordinary governors and extraordinary engineers. Really, the engineering is what set them apart from all the other nations, the earlier nations like the Greeks and the Hittites and the Egyptians. But our own history, I think, is much closer to home. And I've really tried to encourage more South Africans to go down to Isildwana and Rorke's because the story goes on, and Fugitive Drift Lodge still has outstanding people doing the talks. And to sit on that amazing mountain and listen to the story of a great Zulu victory against one of the, at that time, probably the biggest army in the world. And the Zulus, through sheer courage and through the skill of their generals, pulled off a huge victory there. And understanding those relationships and where they've taken us since then, I think, is an important part of the journey all of us should understand that our country's been on.
Just as another part, talking about history, your first job was with Anglo American, and in the past week, we've seen the Oppenheimer family finally cut its ties with the Anglo American group through the sale of its De Beers shares. Knowing the inside of the group, do you think this is going to be something that could never happen, as far as most people at Anglo thought?
You know, I think, there was always the family there were the cross holdings, but the family were, really more De Beers. And then when the family moved out of Anglo, I think that was the first step of, what people would have thought unthinkable. Certainly at the time that I was there, Harry Oppenheimer was still chairman. And certainly at that time, with the second generation of the family there, it seemed unthinkable that the family would ever move on. But when they made the call to move on out of Anglo and to professionalize the management, which happened even before that, I haven't been that surprised that they've now made the call to move on out of De Beers.
Just to close off with, obviously your career is one that's been extremely public. You would have a fair number of youngsters asking you on a regular basis about the secrets to your success or advice you could give them.
Well, I think in life, perhaps, if I look back on life, it's not so much the things that I've done that I might regret, and there are things that I've done that I regret, and I certainly could have done them better. But I think in life, it's the things that if you get an opportunity and you don't do it, that you'll spend the rest of your life wondering, I wonder what could have happened. So, even things like taking on the Nedbank job at the time that I did, some people said to me, well, Tom, that's a poison chalice. What on earth made you, go and do that? And part of the reason is I think I would have spent the rest of my life wondering, I wonder if I could have done that. So when opportunities come your way, seizing them is something that one should do. And then I think just remembering, Alec, that you do never stop learning. When I took the Nedbank job, I'd been in business already for 32, 33 years. I'd run a public company, a smaller one. I'd run BOE. I'd been involved in the mergers of Boland Bank and NBS and BOE. But I can tell you that my 7.5 years at Nedbank was the steepest part of my learning curve of my 38-odd years in business. So you never stop learning, and I think you've got to go into life every day with that approach. You're going to keep learning.
Tom Boardman, a non-executive director now of Nedbank and numerous other companies, former chief executive of that country, and a South African who continues to contribute to the society. Upper Echelon was brought to you by Deloitte for innovative thinking and thorough strategic planning turned to Deloitte.